And welcome to this week's Mailbox, where we discuss some of the more interesting topics that have come up on the videos as comments from the past week. This week there's a number of WoW related topics, but of course also talking about the layoffs from Activision Blizzard as well. So the first thing, I may or may not have to apologise for the lighting here. It's buggering about this. It's got nothing to do with the new webcam either. This is the side lights, which are totally pissing about. So I've had to put another light in there. It's all messed. Anyway, it doesn't matter. First thing we do is the mailbox. Where's the mailbox? This is where the mailbox was last week. And these are the people who got it. It was a slightly bumper crop, slightly more than average. Well, one person more than average. Usually it's about an average of 6. So it was indeed Greengill Coast, Isle of Keldanas, TBC. Pretty easy today. Greengill Coast in the Isle of Keldanas. Oh, easy is it? Okay, challenge accepted. I haven't been too mean with this one. I've been a little bit mean. So this week's mailbox, remember what you have to do is you just have to say the location and which zone it is. You don't have to sort of describe. So someone going there, where was it now? I think it's the ship side of the coast. You don't have to say things like that. Just Greengill Coast, Isle of Keldanas. The same sort of thing for this week's. There it is. Now, same thing. It has a place name, this, and it has a zone. I will even give you a little clue that it is a very significant location when it comes to playing Warcraft 3. Some of you, I'm sure, will get it just from that alone. Right, okay, let's get on to some actual questions. Well, this one is it was a sort of statement. Please come back and make more videos. Yeah, so I'm not making as many videos at the moment. Obviously, the Azeroth review, live little discussion is every Tuesday still, so that's really good. It'd be good if you turned up for that. I still do the mailboxes as long as there's comments. I actually thought, I'll go and be honest, because in the last week, what we've had, last week's mailbox, we've had the Azeroth review, and we've had the one video I did on the Activision Blizzard report. There are a few other videos I'm wanting to get done. But that was it. That was it this week. And I was thinking to myself, well, there's probably not going to be a wide variety of comments. I'm probably just going to have to do a special on follow-up to the Activision Blizzard report. But in actual fact, no, there's quite a nice range of little comments today. But yeah, I mean, the bottom line is this. I'm not playing it as much. And I'll be coming to that with a particular comment this later on as well. Also, when you think about what I traditionally did videos on, a lot of them were guides related to raiding. Well, I don't raid anymore. I'm a filthy casual. I still love discussing World of Warcraft. We get a lot of those discussions out on the Azeroth review. There are other little discussions I like to do as well. Ultimately, although there are still little... I still keep my hand in, it's just because I'm not playing it at a top level anymore. I still make sure I'm keeping well up to date with everything that's going on with Ret Paladins, for example. And I have said I would do a video on that in this coming week, now that I've got half term off. The reason I had to step back from raiding in the first place was work. Work is very, very onerous. And as some of you will know, there's other things I do as well. I have no shortage of interest to step into as well to fill up my time. So it will be an as and when. At the moment, if I'm going to be completely honest, at the moment, the thing that's keeping all this still going at all is the support I get from the regular. So thank you very much for that. In particular, of course, the patrons who are, still supporting me there. Anyway, next one says, I think people just get too hung up on the names and specs of classes, proceeding to go on to make sweeping statements like saying Void Elves shouldn't be priests when there's a spec dedicated to Shadow and Void, and that Zandalari can't be paladins when the story of Zuldazar is literally that the Zandalari revere their lower so much that things are thrown into chaos when Zul turns against them. Yes, well, this was always the thing about priests in particular, wasn't it? It's like, well, these races can do it because they've got that connection to the light. But of course, Shadow, as you quite rightly say there, also there's a spec which focuses on the Void. It's really very warlocky in nature and not very priestly. The problem is that, and you do get this in role-playing games, and it's understandable, is sometimes there's a bit of a disconnect between the lore and the gameplay. And I don't deplore that at all, by the way. I actually hate it when, for lore reasons, they keep gameplay poor. You know, if there's some way of clearly improving gameplay and they don't do it for lore reasons, I don't really like that. I particularly don't like it in World of Warcraft, where it's not even like they're true to their own lore. They change it all the time. They're always retconning. And as a result of that, it makes no sense at all. The other problem we have in World of Warcraft is, of all the role-playing games I've played, it is the most racist in some... I can't think of any other word to describing it, because the fact that they block off certain class choices because of the race, when there's no real reason to do so, is quite mad. And as I say, I've said this before and I'll say it again, were it not for one particularly worrying potential for a class-race combination, I'd be totally happy with the concept of, you know, a race is purely a cosmetic choice, and it should be, so that includes racials that affect gameplay. And I'm not saying all role-playing games do that. I mean, ESO, one that I always talk about, has been really good from a casual point of view. Racials matter even more in that game than they do in WoW. So it's a common thing to have racials that affect your performance somehow. But I just don't think it's good for gameplay. And your class should be the decision of how you want to play. But we have these restrictions in WoW. You have faction restrictions on races, which means that you don't get to choose what you want to look like and how you want to play, because, you know, your faction determines that. And you can change faction, yeah, if you don't have any friends that play the game. But if you want to play the game with friends, and an MMO really, you know, I won't say lives or dies, but it does breathe on friends playing together. That's the essence of it. But yeah, I mean, people can get a bit hung up, especially with WoW lore, because they play fast and loose with it themselves anyway. I think I'd probably agree with a bit of that. Next one, it says, my favourite time in WoW was when I did the Insane in the Membrane. It took me a year or so. Tons of work and sacrifice went into that. Most people have no idea what it took to achieve. And that's because it's boring to do. When the achievement went off, tears ran down my face. I'll never forget that. And that's the thing, actually. I mean, you know, when you've put a lot of work and effort and time into something, obviously it feels really good when you achieve it. The same applies to anything. It doesn't matter if what you're achieving is something... It doesn't even have to be a high achievement. It can be something that anyone can do. It's just that only you have chosen to do it, or a few people have chosen to do it. If it takes a lot of time and effort. And that's, of course, what I used to get from raiding. And I've always sort of wanted a hobby that sort of gives that to me myself. And this, again, coming back to that first comment, is a problem with World of Warcraft for me. I can't do the raiding. Work doesn't really allow me to stick to that schedule. But at the same time, I do want a hobby where I'm going to be doing something more serious. And... the bottom line is that can't be WoW. There's nothing else in WoW to do that with. So I shift it to something else. Warhammer at the moment, in my case. Going for a tournament in a few months. So, but yeah, it is. And when you have got something you want to achieve, and achievement hunting is one thing you could do. It's just, it doesn't interest me. So there's relatively few things in WoW that really give you that. I mean... ratings in PvP, I guess, is one thing. Arenas or battlegrounds. Raiding is, of course, another. You know, pushing keys in Mythic Plus Dungeons could be another. But whatever it is takes time. You know, you don't feel a sense of an accomplishment you shouldn't do, if it doesn't take time and effort. But there's little for me to do in that, by the very nature of the fact I have to play casually. Next one. It says, WoW will finally crash and burn. It defeated all of its competitors, but its killer was greed after all. Brace yourself for a new Activision Blizzard, a worse Activision Blizzard. It is, I've said this, it is going in a different direction, and it is going to be a worse thing for us. The WoW crashing and burning, though, I think you could put paid to that. It's just slowly deflated over time, as you would expect of any game. You know, any game that's been out for this long, you're not going to expect to see it growing. You're expected to see it declining over time, just like we do as we get older. It's not going to crash and burn. I see no evidence that it's going to crash and burn. I just don't see it ever getting better. I don't know what is going to come after it. Obviously, they're going to continue the Warcraft franchise in some way. And I think maybe a leaning to that will come in the next expansion, because, as I say, I think they're finishing the story off to go into a different direction. And maybe they're doing it because part of me sort of thought, okay, they're sort of finishing off the Legion as a threat to Azeroth. Obviously, they haven't killed Sargeras. We sort of know. I mean, to bring back the Titans, it sort of has to be obvious that the only way to contain Sargeras is to imprison him. You can't kill him because he'll just come back. So that is actually a more... people sort of see the fact that Sargeras was imprisoned as a, oh, he could come back. It's actually a way of containing him more permanently. Even though there's no such thing as permanence in this world. We have baddies coming back all the time. Kael'thas, like I keep saying, came back in the same expansion. He didn't even stay dead for an expansion before they brought him back. Yeah. So, and then in Old Gods at the moment, of course, I'm still quite sure they're finishing that off this expansion. But we will see. But they're certainly finishing it off. And then it goes into a new direction there. And as I say, I've always sort of assumed that they're doing it because the writers have thought, look, do you know what? We keep doing things that are basically Old Gods, Legion. Let's do something different. Let's finish this off, close the chapters of this book and start another one. But it could equally be that there is another franchise for the Warcraft game coming out. Another Warcraft game. Not an RTS, maybe not even an MMO, something else. And maybe they want the story for that to be introduced through World of Warcraft. That's another possibility there. But whether it's a game I'm going to enjoy like I have the Warcraft games up to now is doubtful. I don't want to sort of say at this point, oh no, how could I possibly? But I do think it's doubtful. And I do think that, yes, Blizzard, just get used to it now. They have changed. Forget about how they used to do things. They don't do that anymore. Judge them, essentially judge them on their actions is what I would say. And at the moment, their actions are not like their philosophies were before. Next one, it says, for console, they've been adding lots of games with mouse support. I don't know what the KB stands for, sorry. I know I was going to buy a new PC soon, but if the Xbox keeps in this direction, I think why a PC can have the best of both worlds for someone who is horrid with dealing with computer parts and software and everything. Yeah, I mean, I am not of that mind. I dislike consoles, and mostly the reason I dislike consoles is the controllers. But even if they added mouse support, well, that's still not the same as... I mean, you could have a keyboard as well. They could. I mean, they could just have, a games console that is basically replacing a PC and is a cheaper version of a PC in many ways, and you just use your mouse and your keyboard. Yeah, that's true. I still like my nice beefy PCs though, and I shall always be like that as well. And I know I don't rail against it. I know I'm a dinosaur on this regard. I know that there are many advantages to consoles. They are cheaper than a gaming PC. They're easier to store. You can just put them in your lounge. They don't take up as much space. There's not as many things that you need with them. I get that. And gaming is inevitably going to go there. I do not believe that Blizzard will ever release a game again that is only for the PC. I don't believe that that's likely to be the case. I think it will come out not even primarily for the PC. I think it'll come out primarily for either console or mobile. And if we're lucky, I say lucky, it depends on the quality of the game, we may get a PC version. If they bring it out on console, of course, there'll be a PC version. If they bring it on mobile, maybe would there be any point in many cases though? But maybe they would. But I think the focus is going to shift away from PC now. The PC games are probably just going to be adaptations of console or mobile games, and that is disappointing because although a console, in terms of the processing power for games that it gives you, is good for its cost, it's not as good as a more expensive gaming PC. But there aren't enough people who are going to be paying enough money for a gaming PC to fund this hugely lucrative industry, quite frankly. Remember, it's the gaming industry is now an industry much bigger than the film industry in terms of the revenue it brings in. So, and that's driven by people on consoles. It's not driven by people on PCs. But that's unfortunate. There you go. Next one. So, okay, on to the ones about the layoffs. Someone's saying here, people getting laid off doesn't mean the company is doing badly necessarily. We know it's not doing badly. It's just recorded record profits. It could also be just standard corporate expenditure trimming. You seem to disregard the notion that these employers could have skill sets in areas the company just doesn't think transfer to other tasks. No, I'm not disregarding that notion. I think what you're maybe disregarding is the fact that I keep a very, very close eye on Blizzard. I even have information that is not readily apparent unless you dig deeper. That's simply not true, right? And also, no one was railing against the fact that some people have been laid off. Yes, some projects have gone. Budgie disappearing out of there meant you had a group of employees who were basically not doing anything at the moment. Now, I would still wish to seek to use their skills, and if that different role for them was not something they approved of, okay, then fine, call it a day. We're talking about a lot of employees who are working on current projects that need that work. The biggest example, again, I'm going to focus on World of Warcraft here. The biggest example of this was Blizzard have been saying they want to improve their communication with the community. So, to that end, they've produced a new forum, which actually, in many people's views, makes it worse. It's not that we didn't want a revamp of the forum system, but the new one does not meet. People are still having those conversations on Discord. They've not, they've not migrated to the official WoW forums, MMA Champion, WoWhead, stuff like that. But then if you're going to say that you want to improve that, first of all, we're not seeing any evidence of it. We're not seeing that used to exist, and relatively recently, interaction between developers and customers, player base. Even if it's through the intermediary of community managers, it's just not happening. And that brings me on to the obvious point here. So we know of an employee, of course, who was dismissed against their will, because they said so. And this was a community manager who was, I wouldn't describe community managers at all as being effective at the moment, but that's to do with the direction. Like, if you're going to pick on a community manager that's not very good, okay, that may be down to them. But if you're going to say community managers are not doing what you think they should be doing, or certainly what they were billed as doing when they were introduced years ago, that's to do with direction. That's to do with management, not them. But the one who engaged the most, Isithans, basically, has been dismissed. They haven't got rid of the entire community manager. They're not canning the projects. They've got rid of one guy who engaged with the community. That is someone whose skill set is still required there. That is not dead wood. And the same applies to quite a lot. In fact, there's been even developers on current games that they say are still their flagship games, that are bringing in $1 billion dollar plus a year, who've been removed. So no, I'm not disregarding the notion at all. I actually knew what I was talking about. We're not railing against the fact that some employees have lost those jobs. We're railing against the fact that employees in departments within games that are still considered their serious projects have been removed. And what can you conclude when you remove a community manager who is the most well-regarded of all the community managers amongst the community? And I'm just going to sort of draw attention to, Chris Metzen tweeted about a number of things, but this was one that I sort of felt compelled to reply to. But what he said was, flailing, I'm going to break this down as well, there's a few things here. It says, flailing about the apocalypse doesn't help. So this is just talking about, oh, the sky's falling in type things. Yeah, right, that doesn't help, fine. It doesn't hurt either, but whatever. It says, positivity and faith in the long run actually do help. They do, but who do they help? They help the company. It's the same thing with like the banking industry, isn't it? What decides whether a financial system stays strong or collapses has got nothing to do with whether that system is strong. It's entirely to do with the confidence of the people using that system. It's the same with a game. A game does well or not, nothing to do with whether that game is good or not, but entirely down to whether people have the confidence to buy it, either believing that it's good and maybe they then decide it's not, or believing that any little issues when it launches, because it's not really good enough, are going to be fixed. And we see that now all the time. We're now seeing it. People would have laughed at you a few years ago if you'd have said Blizzard would start doing this. But they have, releasing games that are not finished. BFA was clearly not finished. So yes, it does help. But who it helps is Activision Blizzard, the games company. It doesn't help us, the community. And then he says, a community that doesn't support each other won't last. Absolutely. Absolutely. And this is why I felt compelled to reply, I agree about community. This is why the news that the only GM who engaged with the community, and he was, you try and find me some engagement from another community manager recently, because he didn't just talk on forums. He was in Discords, multiple Discords, talking to people openly about the game. Still doing his job. You would never see him criticising his company or the game, but he was discussing things with actual players of the game. You show me another community manager that does that. There's a few that are in there spying on it, basically, which is fine. You know, that's a good way of getting information, but not openly discussing on the same level that he was at all. And I had to say that the only GM who was engaged with the community was given their notice, was met with dismay. The player base tries so hard to form a community with the developers, but we get less and less with each passing year in return, which is what I had to say. And that's just the way it is. We're not getting anything back at all. And then they complain when we start just randomly complaining aimlessly. Of course we're going to aimlessly complain because there is nowhere to aim. You've removed the bullseye for those issues. Which also means they've removed their capacity, you know, because sometimes if parts of the community do complain about things, and naturally if it's explained to them, they'll realise, oh, actually, I hadn't really thought about that. They remove that capacity because the live Q&As don't do that, because that's them just talking at us, not with us, at us. And people are going to be less inclined to see something from another person's point of view that is not willing to see their point of view. Like if you go in to a discussion, you have a disagreement with someone and you discuss things, you get to have their say and they listen to it and then they respond back and you get that back and forth. You're much more likely to find common ground. But when all you're being given is a statement, a press statement effectively, with no acknowledgement of what you're saying, you're going to be less inclined to try and see it from their point of view. Because why should you? They're not doing the same courtesy for you. That's the issue. And then just a last little point that's sort of related to this as well. Someone saying, those remaining 90% must feel like they're balancing on a knife's edge. This is actually true. There are a large number of other employees there are some who've already know that they're gone. There are a number of others who don't yet know. So they've got that hanging over them. And I will just say this, although there's going to be a couple of other questions on related things, but not quite on this. It's not just about the fact of... My focus was not so much on the losing livelihoods. It hurts us because they're removing people who do a good job on the game. Because the community aspect of it, if you've got effective communication, your developers can work more efficiently. You can get more out of them, because that's going to be important later. When you don't have that discourse, then, you know, it's a bit like, I suppose, I don't know, let's say you've got a wedding coming up, you want the wedding cake, and you've got an idea in your mind, but you just say to a baker, right, I want a wedding cake. But you don't give them any other information, so they make a wedding cake. You look at it, that's not what I'm picturing. And so they have another go. No. They're going to go through a dozen cakes before they get it right if you're not giving them any information. We're trying to give information, they're just not accepting it. And of course, the information we give, you know, we can refine. You know, they always complain about that so much of the information is useless. Well, yes, it is. But we can still refine that information if we know exactly what they're trying to achieve. Now, some of us do sort of know that because there are little sources of communication, but they're very narrow and they don't include the vast majority of the player base. So although there are some people who do know those things, we still can't provide that feedback because they're still not accepting it. We just have we can just refine it a bit better. But most people can't. They haven't got a clue. So anyway, never mind. Next one. So, says, sometimes I wonder if companies like EA or Blizzard Activision, we're including them in the same bracket now. That is a stunning indictment. Or at least some people at those companies. That's nice. Watch any content here on YouTube. All the content creators here who are also consumers of their products seem to have the same opinion as the rest of the player base, that they're detached from what their consumer wants and, more importantly, does not want. I'm sure they do, but there's a couple of issues to this. First of all, You've got to understand the ego at play. Everyone has an ego as well, bear in mind, everyone. Some's just bigger than others. But there is an ego at stake here. They're doing a job on something. They don't really like... People don't really like criticism. So people are less likely to watch a video criticising them. So possibly they lean more towards ones where it's not going to be critical of them. And they consume that. And then that, of course, provides positive reinforcement for what you're doing. Oh, yeah, I am watching videos. I'm watching these content creators who say what I'm doing is fantastic. You know, because they're not getting the negative reinforcement, because they're not watching the stuff that's critical. And it's sort of easy to do that because you don't want to. So there is an issue there. The other thing is it's very easy to dismiss it as, well, that's just one person. And someone else is just another person. Even if they add up all of the YouTube, let's say all the ones with 100,000 subscribers at least, you know, that's a sizable number, but it's still a finite number. You know, it's a small number compared to even what the play base is now. And it's easy to dismiss. So, yeah, I think it's very easy to ignore it. They will inevitably watch some stuff on it. And so you've got to bear in mind, there'll be some people at Blizzard that didn't agree with the decision that was made for a particular thing. And maybe they would watch the ones that support, but people are much more likely to watch videos supporting their point of view. That's just how it works. You know, that's why when you look at YouTube channels on any subject, you're always going to get far more likes than dislikes. That's because naturally the people who don't like what you're saying are not going to watch your stuff. And the people who stay and watch it are the people who do like. So that's, you know, it's just how it works. And it works the same for them. People like their little echo chambers. Next one. So it says, it's sad to see that people do lose their job. What this tells me is that eSports are no longer in the Blizzard future. This is the group of people they let go along with supports. Yes, there were a number of those. The developers on the games were not let go. Only time will tell what this means in the future. Sad to see people let go either way. In terms of esports, I don't believe that Blizzard are abandoning that. I think it would be stupid to abandon it. Esports is only going to get bigger, and you're a games company. Of course, they're going to want to get into esports. What it looks like is that their initial foray has sort of collapsed a bit, and that hasn't worked out. Now, what I would also say is I would only query, not say that they're getting this wrong, the fact that they're not making it, presumably not making it profitable at this time. Is that a good reason to drop it? Because in a flourishing industry, in esports, we can take as a little bit separate to just normal gaming. Might you expect to not make that much and maybe just build up your influence for a longer term plan? Is this an issue of short-termism, or is it that what they're doing is clearly not working and they need to rethink it? In which case, I still, you know, I would do that. I would keep with the current strategy, which is not exactly hemorrhaging them money, and consider different ways of doing it. It's a little bit like YouTube itself. You know, YouTube doesn't make Google money. They, a couple of years ago, got some executives to try and make it more profitable. It's not, but you know, I think it's still an important feature for Google. It brings in, it's like a loss leader in many ways. It does enhance Google's power and therefore helps the overall company make money. The same thing could be said of this. You know, if they persisted with the esports and saw it as a loss leader, I'm not saying it would, but I just think maybe thinking long term that they should have stuck with it, even if in the here and now it is a bit of a loss leader, because they will get better by being in the industry, by being in esports. They will learn and they will get better at it. They don't really, I mean, what is their plan? To sit back and let someone else crack the formula and then get into it? Well, then they'll be going in as a small fish in a big pond. You know, they're better off being the ones who do the innovating. But innovation doesn't seem to be something they're really keen on anymore, does it? But that's just my view on it. Next one. So this is to do with storyline decisions, these stupid little choices we allegedly get. says, what if they're tracking how many make each choice, and depending on what's chosen, more gearing the future story around that choice? Now, I have tackled this before, but it is worth just saying again. No, I don't believe that at all. The reason I don't believe it is, first of all, it's never a real choice anyway. We don't actually get a genuine choice. But second of all, they have to plan the story in advance. The story for BFA has already been determined. Now, if individual characters that become really popular and they just planned them on being a bit character, yeah, they may give them further emphasis later on, or not kill them where they were going to kill them. But the story has been written for BFA. It's done. And the story for the next expansion is already underway. Remember, they're working on the next expansion. The story for that's already, well, that's done as well, let's be honest. And then you've got to think of certain projects. You think, well, like, can we just change it? Well, they can't change a part of the storyline that then impacts on the next one. Let's say, for the sake of argument, they're not going to do this, by the way. I don't believe they're going to do this. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, that their plan is to kill off Sylvanas this expansion. But then let's say that in the following expansion, the whole story is based on the idea that Sylvanas is dead. This is a post-Sylvanas Forsaken future, something like that. It's quite difficult, not impossible, it's quite difficult to rewrite an aspect of that story for BFA that's already been determined because of the knock-on effects for the next expansion, because then you have to do all that as well, and then you end up in a right old mess. Then there's things like cinematics. Cinematics are a huge double-edged sword. I've said this before. They look spectacular. I absolutely love the cinematics. But, visually that is, cinematically. Not always in terms of how it's done. But the problem with them is they take a long time to do. So you haven't got that flexibility to change tack while the expansion's ongoing, because you're making your cinematics. They take months and months. It's like over half a year to make one. So, you know, you can't just abandon. I mean, they cost a fortune as well. You can't just abandon that to do something else. So no, that's not feasible. And that's why I say it's a double-edged sword. If we didn't have the cinematics, they'd have more scope for not only giving us greater flexibility about the way we tackle the storylines, but also for things like that. They could do things like that. But with the way they do the storytelling, it's not possible. Next one. So coming back to the Activision Blizzard report, this is about their conference call. I didn't watch it, I'm going to be honest, but I did catch up on a few things. I read a few articles on it. I'm not interested in watching a conference call. But someone's saying here, which is describing Blizzard as a nuanced story in a conference call, which is meant to spin investors, is the equivalent of calling it a dumpster fire. I won't go that strong, but I know I sort of agree with the general point. It says conference calls talk about exciting opportunities and growth, not expected declines, declining in-game bookings, and nuanced challenges. In Q4 2017, it's a year ago, ATVI was still thinking about record in-game services, record bookings, and dominant titles in their markets. Most damning of all, Q4 2017 Blizzard had 40 million monthly active users, and that's down to 35 million in Q4 2018. Yes, it is. So they lost 5 million users, and those users are spending much less. Yes. And I would certainly agree. When you are, I mean, a conference call, first of all, it is for investors, which I'm not bothered, until I win the lottery and buy a load of Blizzard shares. It would have been handy to have won the lottery a couple of weeks ago, because I absolutely would have bought a load of shares. Not that the increase in the price affects me, but, you know, you'd have bought them at rock bottom prices for the dividend. But anyway, the point is that it is certainly true. If you have got exciting plans for growth, then you will just talk about that. You won't have to use language that tries to disguise. You only ever try and use flowery language when you try and disguise some negativity, basically, don't you? If you've got a right load of good news, even if there's some things you think are going to be a bit of a decline, you've got some good news, you will just hype the hell out of it. And I've read reports on this as well, and it is true that they haven't really been doing that. They've talked about other projects, but there's no hyping of it. And yes, okay, you know, when you're working on a project, you don't want to release anything about it in the short term. And for investors, they don't care anyway, because if they're at the point where it's still very secret, there's not going to be a return from it for years. So yeah, and it is true when they looked at the breakdown of the Blizzard monthly active users, the MAUs there has gone down over the last year. Some of which, obviously we believe is from World of Warcraft. I mean, that's the flagship Blizzard game anyway. Heroes of the Storm, of course, I suppose some would account for that because they've reduced they've basically said they're not exactly knocking it on the head, but they've put it in a retirement home, shall we say. They're not going to give it the same level of development anymore. They've basically abandoned Heroes of the Storm. And then they tried to pass that off as, it was always just a project of passion. No. It may have started off like that, same as Hearthstone in terms of developers, this would be a great idea. It was a financial proposition and it made money, and obviously it's not making enough money, so they've abandoned it. They've sent it to the knacker's yard. So yeah, it's not there is no growth there. Basically, is what I'm saying for this. For Activision Blizzard, there may be, but for the current Blizzard crop, there isn't. So their best chance of growth is with a new title, not necessarily a totally new IP, but a new title at least. And we'll just have to see what's going to come through in the next few years, I guess. And then the last one says maybe they are cutting administration to hire developers. Well, two things to say about that. Three things, I suppose. They have said that they intend to increase. They've said the aggregate spending on developers by 20% across a series of games. But saying aggregate just means an average. So you can actually cut developer numbers in. So like they put World of Warcraft in there. It's quite sneaky. So they could actually cut the number of developers on working on World of Warcraft. And it's still 20% on average if they increase it by, something like COD is bigger than that anyway. So they increase it by that, that's got a bigger weighting. But all they're basically saying is they're going to increase it by 20% across those titles. So you could reduce it on one of those titles and it's still increased to 20% overall on those titles as an aggregate, which is the word they used. But in terms of the two main things I want to say here. First of all, if you cut the administration needs doing, developers don't do admin. They might have their own admin to do, but that's taken away from development time. So cutting admin doesn't help because that still needs doing. And when we're talking, obviously we're talking about community engagement. Remember what I said before. If you've got more engagement with the community, you're giving a better line to the developers on not what they should do. The community doesn't tell developers what they should do, but giving them a better line into those sort of thoughts, and it makes them more efficient. Much more efficient. And also with that engagement, it works both ways. It makes us more efficient because we can direct our feedback down the line. Because if they say, right, instead of saying, right, we're going to do this, if they just said, we want to achieve this end goal, then, and they say, we're thinking of doing this to achieve that end goal, someone else may come up with an idea that allows them to still achieve that end goal without doing anything that the player base don't approve of. Someone might come up with a really good idea. So you actually improve the efficiency of your developers. You don't compensate for that by just throwing more developers at it. And remember, especially thinking of World of Warcraft, I can't speak for other games, but I can for World of Warcraft. We already know that they work inefficiently. Not the developer's fault, their management's fault. We know that there are not effective leadership structures within the World of Warcraft development team. Throwing more developers in there is only going to increase the chaos. So it's not going to help anything. But here's the other thing. Are they talking about throwing more developers into these games so that they can produce better quality products? No. They're putting more developers in specifically to be able to create more content. And you might still think, well, that would be good too. No. Think about World of Warcraft. A few years ago, what were they trying to do that they had to abandon? Yearly expansions. Annual expansions. Not feasible. Not at all feasible, because the way Blizzard do things, they do their expansion development properly, or at least they used to, which means that, think about it this way. Battle for Azeroth came out mid-August. The alpha came out February. The open alpha, that is. Obviously, there was an alpha before that. When they started letting various people into the alpha and then the NDAs lift and stuff like that, so people could report on what it was like in there, February. So, 6 months? That's for the open part of it. Obviously, it was being developed for a year and a half before that as well. 6 months of open testing. So if they were going to try and do the same thing, then that would mean that round about now, we'd have to have the open alpha. Basically, what would have to happen is an expansion comes out and then they're already announcing the next one. And then 6 months later, round about nowish, they're opening it up for the alpha testing for that. You're going to get shorter, less nuanced stories. You're going to get less content per expansion. It'll all be about selling those box sets. They want us to carry on subscribing, but instead of buying a new expansion every 2 years, they want us to buy it every 1 year. That, and it'll work the same for other titles as well. That's what it'll be about. It won't be about improving quality. If it was all about improving quality, they would not be getting rid of people who are engaging with the community. QED. They're doing it to bang out more DLCs, more expansions, not to increase the quality of the game. And you can wait and see if you like. If you disagree with that, that is absolutely what they are doing. That is guaranteed what they're talking about. So anyway, that is the mailbox for this week. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. Please subscribe for further content. Click the bell notification as well while you're at it, and share with other people who might also be interested. And until next time, I'll see you later.